the creation and evolution issue, but we're going to try to do it biblically. It's not necessarily easy to do, but we've got a lot of questions, so let's get some of those questions answered. Now, a little bit about myself. I am a marine biologist by training. I spent years scuba diving in the Bahamas and Belize and all over Florida. It was a tough life. But I ended up studying these animals. These are corals. So my degree in coral reef ecology, I was looking at corals and their coloration patterns and things like that, and I never really got very far in that way of thinking. But when I realized that those colors are caused by proteins, and I'm made of proteins, but I don't glow under a black light, I said, well, this is very strange. I want to look into this more. And when I realized that those are proteins, therefore there's genes behind them, what does a gene look like? Well, I got my PhD by stealing the genes out of these animals and engineering them into these animals. I made the Frankenfish. And the green fish had already existed, but I made the world's first red fish. And that opens up a giant can of worms. Is this moral? Is this godly? How far can we go in the field of genetic engineering before we transgress a rule of morality that God has placed? That's a tough question. And I tell you what, there's laboratories at that university I would not have wanted to walk in the doors of, because I know where they got the cell lines that they were using in their experiments. So yeah, Christians, we need answers to these scientific questions, don't we? I'll tell you what, I found a guide for my work on the first page of the Bible. We call this the Dominion Mandate. This is God talking to Adam and to Eve. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. And have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." That is telling us that God put humans on this earth as stewards of creation. We are here to take care of the things that God has given us to take care of. By the way, this is where the U.S. government derives private property rights. The reason we have private property and the right to deal with it is because God gave it to us. He said, if I give you something, take care of it. Oh, interesting. But if that is true, if we're here, I'll say it this way. To take care of something, you need to understand what you're taking care of, correct? The pursuit of understanding is called science. The reason science exists is so that we can fulfill our role in God's created world. And as we learn more about science, we're actually learning more about the mind of God. Science should cause us to praise the Creator. Most scientists, though, use it to deny the Creator. You know, we've been writing about how science and the Bible work together for 45 years now in our Creation Magazine. And as I talk, you can see little pictures of Creation Magazine popping up. That's subliminal. No, kidding. I'm going to show you that everything I'm presenting to you, I had to learn at one point in time. And most everything I'm sharing with you this morning, I actually learned in Creation Magazine. I was barely a Christian. I was not a creationist, if you want to call me that. In my first couple years in college, and someone drugged me down to Wyuka Road Baptist Church in Atlanta. And there was this crazy man at the pulpit. And he was saying that evolution isn't true and the universe isn't billions of years old. And now I am that crazy man. I literally thought the guy had a screw loose. And yet, by showing me what the Bible says, how science works with the Bible, all of a sudden I realized that these two things aren't fighting each other anymore. We also have a gigantic website called creation.com. I hope you go there when I'm done. There's a little search box. You can type something in the search box, look for an answer, and it can almost guarantee you that you'll find an answer to that question. We've got 15 or 16,000 articles now. We're constantly writing new articles. Every week we post brand new articles. And a lot of them are, a big scientific announcement has been made. Hey, let's write an article about it and get it up on our website right away. But when we're talking about science, we got to talk about crazy things. Like your backyard. Geologically, this area of the country is the most crazy and unexplainable area anywhere in the United States. I believe this was created during Noah's flood and afterwards. But looking at this, it is very complicated. Almost every geologic era of Earth's history is represented right out here. Almost everyone. The Ordovician's not there. Big deal. So we need to explain the world we look at, but it's hard, right? Well, we don't start with the complex to explain things. You would never get anywhere. We start with the simpler, develop a model, and then use that model to try to explain what we're seeing in a more complex setting. That's how science works. And you just happen to be sitting on the boundary between that flat Colorado plateau and the Basin and Range province. We call those mountains. So you have all these mountains that are buckled up in the Colorado plateau and all the flat layers, and right here is crazy. So as we're trying to explain the world we see, we're going to scientifically approach this in a stepwise manner, and hopefully at the end we'll be able to explain this better. Is that okay? Now, understand, I don't know everything. I'm a scientist. I study stuff like this for a living, and I love it. But there's huge questions I still don't know answers to. But that's true for everyone on the planet. Nobody knows. But I remember being Mr. Smarty Pants, 18, 19 years old. I thought I knew stuff. And I was an evolutionist. Everyone I knew was an evolutionist. I didn't know anyone who actually believed the Bible growing up. I actually went to church all my life and still don't know anyone who actually believed the Bible. I don't think that's abnormal for a kid growing up in America today, in most denominations. And if you asked me, say, hey, Carter, why do you believe in evolution? I would have thrown this right in your face. This is Pakicetus, straight out of National Geographic. The perfect transitional form between land animals and whales. I needed no other information. I was done. Evolution is a fact. What I didn't know was that cartoon was based only on those blue bones. No bones below the neck at all. What I didn't know was they're about to discover the rest of the skeleton, or that modern depictions of Pakicetus makes it look like a 4-foot-long rat dog with 0 transitional features. And I remember thinking to myself, I think I've been lied to. What else do I have to unlearn? And this started me on a quest to know it for myself, not to trust other scientists. You know what? Scientists are sinful people. And they're limited in their understanding. And they're bigoted and they're biased because they're people. And what they say ain't necessarily so. So we got to take it at face value and then rethink some things. But we've got more information on this topic than any other time in church history. We should be shouting this from the rooftops. But most people in America have never heard a Christian defend the Bible. And it's not in our culture. It's easy to show that. Who can name a Christian character on television? What? Homer Simpson's next door neighbor, and Sheldon's mom. I can't think of any others. And they're not painted in a good light. It's as if Hollywood decided Christianity doesn't exist, and yet we have got powerful answers to the things that they're using to reject Christianity. They just don't want to hear it. So what we did is we took a TV camera. We went around to 5 or 6 college campuses around the Atlanta area, and we interviewed several hundred students. And we asked them 3 questions. And we took their answers and made a documentary out of it called Fallout. The questions were really easy. Did you grow up going to church? If they said no, we said, see ya, we don't want to talk to you. If they said yes, we said, oh, were you ever taught anything about creation and evolution? And the third question was, do you still go to church? And that was it. And those 3 questions opened up these amazing conversations. And what we found was an incredibly strong trend. And we talk about statistics, it's never perfect because there's plenty of kids that were raised in a nice Christian household. Maybe they went through the Becca homeschool program and blah, 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 blah. And they might even have Isaiah or Esther or some godly name. And now today they're totally atheists. That does happen. We know that. And yet what we found was that the churches that preach us from the pulpit, Sunday schools that talked about this, families that had these discussions over the dining room table, were raising a crop of Christians who were much more willing to stand tall in an incredibly anti-Christian environment called the American university system. And what we realize is that if we want to talk to people, We have to give them an alternative to the things they're using to reject Christianity. And it's funny, most people don't know what they're talking about. It doesn't take much learning to realize you know more about Jesus than the atheist does. Their main weapon is ridicule. Why? Because when you're being ridiculed, people don't talk. It's embarrassing. That's not a valid argument. And all you gotta do is say, okay, now put aside your ridicule. Let's have an intelligent conversation. They usually can't do it. They don't want to go there because they understand, if they look at this at all, that their arguments are very weak. And yet, we're intimidated. So can I help you a little bit? Can I encourage you? Let me point you to something. Every Friday, we put out an email. We call it Info Bites. It's something new or informative, something exciting, that brand new scientific thing that's challenging us. We get an article, we read it, and then we will send it out on Friday, a list of all our articles and whatever else we're talking about, and it goes around the world. In fact, everywhere I go, people are coming to my events because they got one of these. We send it to everyone on the list, and then when we have a speaker traveling, we'll send a note to everyone within like a 50-mile radius of the event. People are always coming. So that's there for you if you want to take advantage of it. While I'm speaking, we're going to hand out a form that looks like this. We're looking for a name, an email address, and a zip code. I promise you we're not going to send this to anybody else. You're not going to get a bunch of emails from conservative.com or something like that. No, we do not. Farmers has only for our purposes. All right, those are going around. Thank you, guys. And we're talking about science. But when we're talking about science, we got to define what we're talking about. What is science? Well, I don't know. I'm a scientist. I don't have a definition of the word. We kind of intuitively know, but what is it really? Well, let me give you two big ideas about science, two different ways of thinking about it. First, when you were in like 7th and 8th grade, you remember you had to write make a hypothesis and then do some experiments and test that. That's called operational science. Some people call it experimental science. Operational science is just figuring out how things work. You're dealing with observing and testing and repeating experiments today. And it has nothing to do with evolution. I mean, NASA has these nuclear-powered rovers that they can drive around Mars, or one of them at least. And it's all based on operational science, just figuring out how things work. But this type of thinking was pioneered by people like Johann Kepler. He's a great astronomer who figured out the 3 laws of planetary motion that NASA used to fly things around the solar system. He said of his work, it was like thinking God's thoughts after him. But it wasn't just Kepler. If you made a list of early modern scientists, almost every single one of them was a Bible believer. Science and the Bible are not fighting each other. You ever struggle in science class? Remember those formulas you all had to learn? Ugh. All those letters in the formulas? Ugh. Almost every one of those letters is the initials of a Christian's name. It was getting rid of Zeus. It was getting rid of pixies in the garden and elves and all that kind of stuff. They say, no, all that is nonsense. There is a God outside of time and space who created time and space. He's an infinite, all-knowing, all-powerful God who's not fickle like a Zeus. He's not capricious. And he never does anything against his own nature. So the ultimate lawgiver would naturally have created a universe that behaves according to law. That is the birth of the thought that there are scientific laws. It came straight out of Christian philosophy. You've never heard that in science class or history class. They don't want you to know this, but it's abundantly and absolutely clear. It was a logical thinking brought to us from Christian scholarship that gave us modern science. And yet, I understand that most scientists today are not Christians. I know that very well. Why? Well, there are other forms of science. Another type of science is called historical science. This is when you reach back in time to try to explain something you did not see. But can you see the further back in time you go, the less certain you can be of what you're talking about? So we're talking about millions and billions of years ago, really. When you look at Grand Canyon, you look at all those lines, you realize that they're saying there's a 30 million year gap here and a 100 million year gap there and a 1.2 billion year gap between these flat layers. Where's the evidence of time? Because time would equal erosion. You just layer. Do they really know what they're talking about? All right, Pop quiz. Science class. One question, true or false. You ready? True or false? A dinosaur dies, sinks to the bottom of some sea, and he rots and his bones are lying there. And over a very long period of time, he's buried in sediments and petrified, and maybe millions of years later, plate tectonics lifts these rocks up and erosion exposes a dinosaur skeleton. True or false? Who says true? This is how fossils form. Who says false? Which half of you are not going to answer my trick question? This is a trick question. There's a problem, though. Can you imagine that happening? I can imagine it happening. Therefore, it sticks in my brain, even though it's false. And that's why they put this in the Children's Museum, to give children a false understanding of where fossils come from. See, I'm a marine biologist. This is clearly not true. Let's get in a submarine and let's look around the bottom of the ocean for a big dead thing. What do you think you're going to see? Ew. Things get eaten in the oceans. In fact, according to the laws of chemistry, bones dissolve in seawater. Oh, so science has to explain things like this. Fish that were petrified before they began to rot? What? Or fish eating fish fossils? Or mother ichthyosaurs giving birth fossils? Or salamander fossils? That salamander stomach is full of clams, and his gills are there. His tail's only a few cells thick. How do you turn something like that to stone? Does a millions of years version of geology have a good answer for something like that? No, because you have to bury it and petrify it quickly, or you don't get the fossil. Does that make sense? Well, would you like a biblical explanation of how this might happen? This is Goldie. He's happily swimming along on the earth the day before Noah's flood. And then the flood starts, and he's overwhelmed by some underwater muddy avalanche, and now he's dead. But he's trapped in mud, and mud is water, and the water has dissolved salts and minerals in it. And as it dries out, the salts and minerals are going to crystallize. And in the heat and the pressure, if we can drive some of that into his flesh before he completely rots away, we would get what we call a fossil. Now we understand some dinosaur fossils that are not petrified. And that's a giant shock. That's not, in fact, it's a shock for me. I think those things are buried in a flood 4,500 years ago. I wouldn't expect anything left after that much time of rotting, and yet there it is. Flexible tissue, blood vessels, red blood cells, evidence of DNA. None of that's supposed to be true. But for the evolutionists, it can't be true, because we know how fast things rot. We've been studying that for over 100 years. We have a documentary on the tables called Evolution's Achilles Heels. I'm very proud of this. This is 3 years of my life I poured into this. And we did nothing but interview Bible-believing PhD scientists. And then we had non-scientists review it and review it and review it to make it understandable. We edited it so it's for the masses. It's a fantastic a book and a documentary project. And we captured Dr. Marcus Ross. He's a friend of mine. He's a paleontologist, a fossil expert. And he said, the existence of a fossil by itself is actually proof that something happened very, very fast. But then he says, but if the fossil happened quickly, the rock that contains the fossil must also have occurred quickly. So now we're talking about the entire fossil record as a record of fast, not slow, or the fossils wouldn't be there. Including things like this petrified tree that's sticking vertically through the geologic column while defying evolutionary time. A polystrate, a many-layered fossil, cannot exist because trees, they rot, they burn, they fall over, they get eaten by termites. I don't know how much time that is in the evolutionary record because it depends on where you are, what formation you're looking at, but it's at least thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. At least. That tree cannot exist. And there are polystrate fossils of trees, dinosaur bones, and things like that in different rock layers all around the world, and each one of them saying no to the time. Do you see what I'm doing? You realize that when you hear a sermon or watch a video or any kind of a lecture, the speaker is trying to get you to draw a conclusion, right? And all the examples I just gave you are designed to do what? They're designed to get you to question time. How much time has there been is a critical question. And so now we can ask the question, where does the millions of years idea come from? Well, honestly, it comes from European geologists in the 1700s who were trying to explain the world using nothing but natural processes. No miracles, no creator, slow and gradual. Count up the layers, count up the years, and that kind of thought. That's a philosophy called naturalism. All the scientific training I had is all based on naturalism. Naturalism is a great science for the laboratory. I don't think God's got his finger on the scale when I'm doing any scientific experiment. And yet naturalism is a terrible explanation for where everything came from. Because you can't explain stars, planets, the earth, life, complex life, sexual reproduction, all these different things in biology and geology and physics and chemistry. You cannot explain them unless you had an intelligent agent from the outside ordering all the molecules and let go. Now you have a living thing. One doesn't lead to the other. But this millions of years concept, what if slow and gradual doesn't explain what we see? I'm using something you should be very familiar with here. What if it doesn't explain? And I'm going to turn to a couple of things that happened recently. This was 4 winters ago, I think. The highest dam in the United States nearly failed. The Oroville Dam in Northern California. It's actually the highest dam in the U.S., but honestly, that's not a big hill compared to the size of the world, and that's not a lot of water compared to major rivers in the world. But the dam almost overflowed because they had too much snow melt that year. So the engineers said, we just got to turn on the spillway. And they opened up the gates. And over just a couple of days, that water ate through steel-reinforced concrete and carved a side canyon 1,300 feet long, 400 feet wide, and 160 feet deep through solid rock, which is now the gravel out in the riverbed. I thought erosion was slow. Well, it can be, but it can also be very quick. See, something happened here. It's a process called cavitation. When water's flowing over a surface, it flows nice and smooth until it gets a little bit too fast. And if there's any bump or irregularity, the water can lift up off the surface and create a vacuum. And then that imploding vacuum can eat through stainless steel. It can eat through stone. So if you ask me, hey, Carter, how long did it take to carve the Grand Canyon? I'm going to say, I don't know. How fast was the water flowing? That's the first question. Because once it's a little too fast, all bets are off, and you can get catastrophic wasting erosion. You can have mud flows that are like 90 or more % stone and sand and just a little bit of water, and they'll still flow, even on a 1% slope, for miles, and just tear up anything underneath them. You don't even need a lot of water to get a lot of erosion. Oh, I've always been a little nerd. There's me, back when I had hair. Red hair. Oh, I miss that hair. Anyway, this is me in 5th grade. This is 1980. This is Mr. Ackerman's class. I lived at a marina in New York, in the Hamptons. But we lived on a dirt road. There's a 16-boat slip marina and an 8-unit motel that my parents owned. I grew up there. It's a wonderful place to grow up in the summertime. It was cold and rainy all winter long, but that's beside the point. My 2nd floor bedroom window looked out over the bay and out over the ocean. And every morning the sun rose right in my window. It was a beautiful place to live. But at the end of my 5th grade year, something really weird was happening. The sun was off. It was like horror movie spooky effect red. It was coming up as red fires, like weirdness. What is going on? Well, it turns out that a mountain 3,000 miles away from my house had just exploded. And Mount St. Helens not only was affecting the weather on the other side of the continent, it's given us a tremendous testimony that a lot of geology can happen very quickly. There's a woman here for scale. There's 3 different layers laid down by that volcano, not over millions of years. In May of 1980, in June of 1980, and in 1982. Big mud flow came down the river, deposited that upper layer, and carved the canyon. Does that look like the fossil record to you? Yeah, we saw multiple different types of rocks and rock formations form very quickly. And this is not historical science, because this is after the invention of the television camera and before the invention of deepfakes. This is a fact of history that's not debated. Actually, you know what? I have a lecture that I did about conspiracy theories, basically flat earth theory and geocentrism. And in there, I tongue-in-cheek made up this thing I call Carter's Law of Information Contamination. And it's this. Over time, the number of true facts that will be contradicted on YouTube will grow. And when we get to the point where every true fact is contradicted, our society will collapse. We've already reached that point, I'm pretty sure. But that middle layer, I'm going to zoom up on that. This is ashfall. And look at all the layers. Now, some geologists before that might have been said, count up the layers, count up the years, slow and gradual, millions of years. No, dude, this is an afternoon. This is probably 5 minutes. Ash falling out of the sky, spontaneously making these lines. So we now know it doesn't take millions of years to form all these different rock layers. I haven't answered the question yet how old the Earth is. What do you think? Where am I going to go now? Well, let's take a tour of the Bible. Let's just see what the Bible has to say in this subject. First, we must acknowledge the Bible reads like it's claiming to be the history book of the universe. From Genesis to Revelation, unlike any other religious book in the world, we have an all-comprehensive history from beginning to end. That's amazing. And if you read that first page of your Bible, it sure does read like God created everything in 6 consecutive days a few thousand years ago. Now, there are a lot of ways of expressing long periods of time in Hebrew. None of them are used here. If there was any hint of anything, someone could drive a truck through that gap and add millions of years there, but it doesn't work. The gap theory does not work. The day-age theory does not work. Theistic evolution does not work. The words in the Hebrew do not allow for this. But you know what? I remember trying to add evolution and millions of years to this every way you can imagine. I tried and tried and tried, and I kept running up against a brick wall. I want to encourage you, if you're struggling with this, and I'm almost certain someone in this room, probably more than one person in this room, is struggling with this, keep struggling. Don't give up. It's always worth fighting with the Word of God as long as you're willing to accept what it's saying. The problem is it's intimidating. Because if you say, yes, I believe the earth's only 6,000 or so years ago and God created it in 6 consecutive days, including the rest of the universe, you just thumb your nose at every college professor in this country and every atheistic YouTube influencer. It is a hard road to walk down. But come on, you already believe that Jesus' mother didn't have an earthly father and that he rose from the dead after he predicted it. I mean, what are you worried about? The age of the earth? No, it's the resurrection of Jesus is a bigger miracle. So let's put everything in context. But let's understand that the New Testament, where we get Christianity from, leans heavily on the Old Testament for its theology. In fact, there's over 100 direct references, lots of allusions, but 100 direct references and quotes from Genesis in the New Testament. 60 of those come from the first 11 chapters. What's in the first 11 chapters? Creation, the flood, and the Tower of Babel. Every single New Testament author references those first couple chapters. In fact, Jesus at least 16 times in the Gospels. Look at this in Mark chapter 10. He starts off by quoting in Greek the opening words of the Greek book of Genesis in the beginning. And then he quotes from Genesis twice. But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and two shall become one flesh. Hey, did Jesus really believe that Adam existed at the beginning of creation? Then he didn't believe in evolution. Because in evolution, humans come at the end. After 13 or so billion years. Not at the beginning. But I know most people don't accept that. I got that. But look what Jesus told Nicodemus the Pharisee in John chapter 3. Nicodemus is struggling. Can a man be born again, he says. And Jesus says, if I've told you earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe I tell you heavenly things? Well, I believe one of the main reasons why Christianity struggles to remain relevant in Western cultures today is people have thrown out the earthly things in the Bible. That's the science and the history. But the same people who wrote the science and history also wrote the theology. And if they got all the science and history wrong, why would you trust them when they write anything about theology? And what we see is that the spiritual baby gets thrown out with the earthly bathwater, if I can mix my metaphors. It's a very common formula. Start really questioning the accuracy of the Bible and its history and its science, and how do you know any of it, the rest of it, is also true. But the Bible is consistent in its treatment of this topic. Look at Romans 5. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned. Who's that man that Paul's talking about? Adam. Okay, so just as sin came into the world through Adam, and death through sin. Wait a minute, that means there's no death before Adam sinned. If that's true, there's no evolution. Because evolution requires billions of years of death to produce an Adam. The Bible has it exactly the opposite. And this is a critically important thing for theology, because Adam sinned, therefore death came through sin. Jesus Christ had to die to pay for sins. He was God. He could have created any way he wanted to save us. He could have come down to earth and said, hey, y'all, your sins are forgiven. Have a nice day, and gone back up to heaven. He could have done that if he wished to. But when he said that death is a punishment for sin, death had to be a punishment for sin. That's why he had to hang on the cross and die. For me. Are you kidding me? I don't deserve that. You don't deserve that either. But it's all wrapped up in his Genesis theme. And we reject Genesis at our peril. But we get the idea that death is a punishment. Genesis chapter 2. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Now, the Hebrew does not say instantaneous death on that day. The word death is used twice. It's something like, in dying you will die. Or, Adam, if you sin, your death is guaranteed. And he did die. But God cursed the world. He says, after Adam sinned, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you should eat of it all the days of your life. But it's not the dirt. It's the universe. The entire universe. I remember the day I realized how many references to creation were in Romans 8. I was like, whoa, there's a lot of them. For instance, the creation waits with eager longing. The creation was subjected to fertility. The creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption. The whole creation, Greek word there is katissis. Everything has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. Paul is harping on the fact that the entire universe is weighed down by the weight of Adam's sin. It is nonsensical in an evolutionary context. It is absolutely sensible in a Genesis, creation, and fall context. And one of the reasons why we have a future hope is because we're hoping that Jesus is going to come back and restore all things. Well, you don't restore something unless it was corrupted. We want to go back to the original state, which is without sin, without death, without suffering, without misery. And that's waiting for us. Look at Revelation 21. He, that is Jesus, will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things are passed away. What are the former things? It's all the junk we got from Adam. And I say that because in the same context it says, there's no more curse. Oh, he just lifted the curse that was applied in Genesis chapter 3. And then right after that, the tree of life reappears. What? The tree of life's coming back? Yes. The tree of life that we were excluded from after sin came in, we're going to have access to again. We will live forever. I don't know what the tree of life does, but we will live forever with Christ in eternity on a recreated earth. Not floating in the clouds. We're not going to have wings and strumming harps. No. On a recreated earth, the way it was supposed to be. You know what this is? This black squiggle here, those are all the chapters in the Bible. That rainbow, those are all the cross-references amongst all the chapters of the Bible. You even have cross-references of cross-references. You can't pull Genesis out of that without destroying the integrity of the rest of Scripture. Because the later authors will quote from life of Adam or Cain or Noah and make very important theological conclusions in the same exact way they quote from the life of King David or Solomon. And they don't put caveats. All they had to do is say something like, yeah, but, and they never do that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Tolkien. I have read The Lord of the Rings probably 15 times. Movies are okay. I've read The Silmarillion and all the other accessory books. I love it. But if I was going to come into here and I was going to quote to you something from one of Tolkien's books and say that's history, you would call me a heretic. Because it's not history. It's some guy's imagination. It was made up. The New Testament authors treat Genesis as if it's history. Now what do we do? But if that's history, we don't have millions of years. And we have to explain the fossil record. How do we do that? We're going to turn to Noah's flood. About 1,600 years after the scene in the garden, we have a man named Noah, the only righteous person on the earth. And the earth is so violent, so wicked, God's going to push the reset button. So he finds Noah and he says, I've determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. So he says, build a big ship. We call it an ark. Noah builds it. Then in the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the seventh. Hey, I know most of you are not scientists. I know that. I am not good in languages. I don't know how I made C's in English. My teachers were nice to me. I'm not talking about French class. That was torture. Would someone who's good in languages help me out? What genre is this? Prophecy? Poetry? Allegory? Or historical narrative? Is that written like a specific thing happened on a specific day of a specific person's life? Yeah, Genesis is written like history. On that day, the fountains of the great deep burst forth, the windows of heaven were open, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, that's nice. Did that really happen? And if it happened, what would you expect to see? Well, everywhere I go, I'm looking for evidence of Noah's flood. And if we put our thinking caps on, we can see it. First, let me give you two big ideas of how to think through this. One, think about what rapidly rising muddy water is going to leave behind. And we're flooding continents. Think of the scale of deposits. And all of a sudden, I'm not surprised that the sandstones in Grand Canyon outcrop where I live in West Georgia. These are continental scale deposits, and proportionally, they're thinner than a sheet of paper. They're tens of thousands of square miles in extent and only a few hundred feet thick. Things like that are not being formed on the world today. Sandstones, like sand at a river, gets deposited at the mouth of the river. It doesn't spread out in a sheet across a vast surface. So if the present is the key to the past, something different happened in the past. But think about what's going to happen to these sediments that were newly laid down as the floodwaters start rushing off of the earth. I predict a massive amount of erosion, but not by rivers, by sheets of water. And they're going to leave planation surfaces in weird places. You're familiar with Monument Valley. You ever realize all those buttes and mesas had the same height? They were carved from a plane. But those rocks, just to the north, they dip underneath other rocks. There's about a mile of rocks that were erased from the surface of the earth, creating a flat plain. And I suspect as the floodwaters got shallower, they started to peter out, and the ending flood removed this and left these weird things behind that are not being explained by modern processes because erosion is destroying these things. Nothing is creating vertical cliffs today. All erosional forces are rounding things off. And where are all the boulders at the base of these cliffs? Where's all the sand? It's been carried off the continent. Now let's go back to Grand Canyon again. You stand on the rim of Grand Canyon, you look north, you see what's called the Grand Staircase. The rocks around here are part of that. This mile-high stack of multicolored rocks. Around the Grand Canyon area, on this flat plain, there's a couple of hills. And in those hills have the same stripes as in the Grand Staircase to the north. In other words, those rocks used to cover the Grand Canyon. But a mile of rocks are missing. And then Grand Canyon is carved on top of a hill. It's a water gap, just like the Virgin River here. That river's not supposed to flow through a mountain chain. It's supposed to flow around a mountain chain, but it goes through a mountain chain. Grand Canyon is this massive, wide hill, and the high point of the canyon is in the middle. What does that? The Colorado River is supposed to flow to the Gulf of Mexico, but it falls into a crack in the ground and gets diverted and goes over to Baja now. Weirdness. And look at all these layers. Lay down perfectly flat. Boom, boom, boom. And there's a 30 million year gap right beneath that white stripe. Where's the evidence of it? The surface of the earth was exposed to the atmosphere for millions upon millions of years and no erosion happened? I do not think this is evidence of long periods of time. This is excellent evidence for the power of the water coming off of the earth at the end of the flood. And that canyon does not look like it was carved by a puny little Colorado River. This is a massive, And plus, it's not just the canyon, it's the surface above the canyon that has to be explained. But you know, one more thing about Noah's flood we have to understand. This is not a kid's story. This is a horror story. Everybody dies. This is ugly and gross. It's not like there's a giraffe sticking his neck out and toucan on top and Noah and his wife are up on the top and everyone's smiling. No, everyone is dying and everyone in the ark knows it, and it's ugly. Why? Because the wrath of God is ugly. The penalty for sin is death, and that is yucky. And yet, in the middle of all this, through faith in God, Noah came through the waters of death and came out alive on the other side. What does New Testament tell us? It says he or she who puts their faith in Jesus Christ will be ushered through that second judgment, the fiery judgment, and come out alive on the other side to inherit eternal life in heaven. There's a picture of salvation in the middle of all that. And it's beautiful. And if we reject the flood as historical, we lose a great model of salvation. Look, there's a lot of other topics. I only covered a couple. I just did hop, skip, and a jump over them. Dig in. First, I would recommend you, if you're looking for answers, read your Bibles. That has more answers to the questions than probably you realize, and definitely I realize. I'm always consistently surprised. I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize the Bible talked about that, and boom, there's an answer for me. Plus, it helps me, as I study more and more and more, build a model and a concept of things. I mean, we can't grapple with this unless we really know the Scriptures. After that, I'd say go to creation.com and start reading. Thousands upon thousands of articles, and we're always making new ones. You're not going to run out of stuff to read. If you want a recommendation from me, and some people can ask me for a recommendation, I'm going to point you to Creation Magazine. You saw the little subliminal things popping up, right? On purpose. This is, for me, one of the major things. I think God studied me into Christianity using this magazine in 1989. And I can't believe I get to work for this organization now. The people who started are retiring. I'm standing in some very big shoes. But Creation Magazine, it's there. It comes out 4 times a year. We call it the National Geographic of the Bible, but no, that's ridiculous. Because National Geographic is about to go bankrupt because no one does print magazines anymore. But you know what? Even though most ministries have gotten rid of their magazines if they had one, we're not going to do that until the bitter end, because we know more people read Creation Magazine than even visit our website. And creation.com is a really important piece of internet real estate. Thousands of people read our web articles, but tens of thousands of people read our magazine. And we get letters and emails constantly from Creation Magazine. Thank you, I use this to witness to other people, or you increased my faith, or I just got saved. Amazing. If you'd like to get it, we're going to pass out a sign-up form in a minute, and you can sign up there, or just see this at the table in the back. But if you sign up for a 2-year magazine subscription, so it comes out 4 times a year, we'll also sign you up for the digital version of our magazine, which we encourage you to share with other people, and our monthly newsletters. And I'm going to include 2 DVDs. I'm going to throw in Fallout, that documentary I talked about earlier, talking to college students, and Darwin, the Voyage Shook the World. We did this in honor of Charles Darwin's 200th birthday. We did a National Geographic style documentary. It cost us about $1 million on the life of Charles Darwin. If you want to understand creation and evolution, you got to understand that man. That's there for you. Okay, guys, you can do that. Sign-up form looks like this, easy peasy. You'll notice in the back there's a place if you want to give a gift subscription to someone, you can use the back for that. All right, I'm going to step down just a minute. Let me point you to 1 or 2 more things. First, if you're just getting started out, that red book, the Creation Answers book, is going to answer 99% of your questions. That's why we wrote it. We also have a pack in the back. It's called the Starter Pack. It comes with the Creation Answers book. Then the #1 best-selling creation evolution book ever written called Refuting Evolution, and it comes with a DVD also. Here's Evolution's Achilles Heels, the book and the documentary. If you like to read, there it is. If you like the emotional impact of a documentary, there it is. Here's a new book of mine, Biblical Geology 101. If you're new to rocks and you don't know what we're looking at, hey, this will help explain. Just walk you through, not from a geologist's perspective, it's from a regular person's perspective, how to explain rocks. In fact, I just wrote Biblical Biology 101. That'll be out in a couple of months. I'm very excited about that. If you're worried about how old the Earth is, radiometric dating, and all those sorts of questions, there's a Deep Time Deception. If you're wondering about how the Earth is shaped, how Noah's flood shaped our Earth, it's a great book. Now, a lot of these things have overlaps, but each one of them is a slightly different flavor of the discussion. We have some kids' books like Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibbs, a little cricket going around the world, looking at rocks and minerals and fossils. We have Exploring Dinosaurs with Mr. Hibb. We've got a comprehensive 12-part series on the first 11 chapters. This is excellent stuff. In fact, I wrote a study guide for this, which you can get on creation.com. It's the Genesis Academy. It's too late, I think. I think we just closed up our Tour Israel slots, but maybe there might be a last-minute edition if anyone wants to go to Israel with us in September. Last year, I spent 6 weeks in Egypt doing a tour of biblical Egypt. It was amazing, and we're going to go back to Egypt again in 2024, so you might want to jump on that. But look, I did not come here to sign you up on a tour. I didn't even come here to sell you a book. I came here to encourage you. We have answers to the questions. But in order to get them answered, we just need to spend some time reading, thinking, studying, and seriously asking ourselves if we really do believe it. It's a hard question, but we all must ask that question. I'm going to leave you with this. 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that's in you. You do it with gentleness and respect. You can do that? Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for giving us this beautiful world to live in. We don't understand a lot of aspects of it, but we trust that you are the creator and you built it. Thank you for giving us the Bible. You didn't have to do that. You gave us a record of where everything came from and why things are the way they are and where things are going. So thank you for that. Forgive us, Lord, for not knowing the Bible as well as we should. Some of us have been walking on this earth for a long time, and we just let the world interfere with our studies, or we just forgot to refresh our minds. We've forgotten a lot of what we used to know. But Lord, we also know you're a forgiving God. That's clear because you're still dealing with us. You haven't thrown us to the curb. You've picked us up time and time again and dusted us off and stood us on our feet and just said, go. So help us to go. Help us to be faithful. You've shown us amazing things and giving us amazing treasures. Help us to share those treasures with other people, specifically the treasure of the knowledge of heaven and how to get there. And Lord, take this little church. Bless them to be a light upon the hill. Bless them to be free and open with their homes and their money and their words as they interact with people in this community. And frankly, there's some people living in darkness right around here, and we know them, and they know them. Just help them, Lord. Open their mouths. Give a smile. And give a testimony to what Jesus has done for them, because other people need to hear it also. Amen. Thank you much. You want to say anything? Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up on a Sunday afternoon to hear Crazy Me talk. I'm going to present to you something that you've never heard in a church before. In fact, for many of you, you've probably never heard any of these concepts. This is let's go into left field and see what craziness exists out there. We want to understand how the universe works. We want to understand our position in the universe. And we want to understand how we relate to the God, the creator of the universe. I'm sorry, but this is going to be humbling. And we're going to find out that we are dust very quickly. There's three big things. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Robert Carter. I work for Creation Ministries International at our U.S. office near Atlanta. We have 7 international offices, and there are about 30 people like me on the speaking circuit. We're going to visit 1,200 or 1,300 churches this year alone. We go to places like this to answer people's questions, to equip people, and to encourage them. So, this is equipping and encouraging. That's what we're trying to do tonight. Well, I'm going to present you with 3 big ideas throughout this lecture. 1, science depends upon philosophy. I'm going to attempt to prove that, and in fact, it's going to be very easy. That's not supposed to be true because most scientists like to think that they are outside of their own biases and their own constraints, but that is not true. 2, there are more things we do not know than we do know. In fact, probably half of what we think is true ain't. But we just haven't figured out what half is not true yet. And so we think we know stuff. It's a really sketchy business. 3rd, I'm going to try to encourage you that it is reasonable to trust the Bible. Okay, let me ask you a question. How do you know what you know? Think of something you think you know. Your mother's name, your birthday, your address, how much money you have in your bank account. You think you know that. You think it's true. How do you know it's true? Because you have no reason to doubt it, right? It's just a fact. It's just sitting there, and it's always been there your whole life, and why would you not worry? Why would you worry about it? It just is. But how do you really know? Scientists cannot prove that the universe wasn't created yesterday and aliens filled your brains with false memories. You can't prove that you're awake right now and that this is not a dream. You cannot prove that I'm not a robot. These are things you cannot know. And that makes people very uncomfortable when they consider them, but these are, if you would like, scientific facts that you can't prove any of those things scientifically. But we know stuff, and we're walking around the world. There's not a giant conflict between, like, every time I go open a front door, it opens. It doesn't turn into a marshmallow or a monster. It's a door, and you push it, and it opens, and it's very systematic and very predictable. And so what we do is, as we're going through the world, consider being a child and not knowing anything. The world is insane. Random things happen all the time, and you have no control over it. You don't know what's going to happen. But as adults and young people, we're figuring things out, and the world becomes predictable because we've used our brain to try to put two and two together, and therefore the world starts to make sense. You okay with that so far? But sometimes learning about the world feels like you're drinking from a fire hose. There's too much information. There's just too much, especially in the modern world. We're constantly having information, beeps and boops, and the phone pings, and I get an email, and I get on YouTube and try to look up the war in the Ukraine, but then this other thing distracts me over here, and there's too much information. I can't know it all. The worst thing is, though, that the world is full of misinformation. And is really, really difficult, I think, politics, to separate what's true from what's not true. And it's incredibly frustrating. We think we know stuff, but some of what we know is just wrong, and some of it people are lying to us. Oh. And there are people out there who speak very confidently, and yet they're lying through their teeth. And we don't have enough knowledge, enough expertise to prove that person is wrong. We have to trust them. We have to take them at face value. Theologians, philosophers, scientists, presidents. Are you angry yet? How do you know what you know? And here's the worst part of it all, the absolute worst thing in our modern world. All the big media platforms pigeonhole us. Oh, you're a white Christian female of 42 to 45 years old? Guess what? They're only going to show you a subset of the advertisements. You go on YouTube, they're going to show you a subset of all the possible YouTubes. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, pick whatever it is out there. They've pigeonholed you, they've identified you, they have cataloged you, and they put you in an echo chamber. So not only can we not know everything, we're only being spoon-fed a subset of all the possible information. 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. Paul is talking here about the heavenly state. While we're on this earth, we see, I love that phrase, through a glass, darkly. Like, look through the window there. You can't see through the window. That's what he's talking about. We can only get a vague sense that it's still daytime out through that window. But that's all you can know because it's obscured and clouded. And that's what it's like when we're talking about the heavenly realm. I mean, the Bible talks about angels. Remember that part where Elisha prayed that his servants' eyes would be opened when they're stuck in Samaria under the siege, and he sees the chariots and horsemen of God and all the surrounding hills, and he couldn't see it before? There are unseen things around us that we are not in tune to because we're not on the other side of death yet. So how do we even trust this world when there are angels and when there are demons and when There's a God in heaven who can work miracles and change things. How do you trust that the floor is not going to open up and we're going to all fall through the floor right now? Cool questions, right? Now, as a Christian, I have these questions, but so do the secular scientists. This is New Scientist magazine several year ago. They had the cover. It just says, why? Do we exist? Do we grieve? Are we irrational? Why is there a cosmic speed limit? It's the speed of light. Why does evolution happen? I don't know, it's the assumption that evolution actually happens, etc., etc. No one on earth can answer these big questions. Therefore, when I approach science, if I'm thinking more clearly than normal, it's a frightening process. It's a frightening prospect. Because there's tons that I don't know, and I will never know. This is one of my favorite articles I've ever written. I put this in Creation Magazine. We are less than dust. I said, what's the human body composed of? And what I did is I said, well, we're made of atoms. So let's just take a typical atom, like a hydrogen atom, or even an oxygen atom, a carbon atom. And let's take that nucleus and blow it up to the size of the sun, so we have something to compare to. Now, an atom has electrons around it. So you have the sun and you have all the planets. Now we have the nucleus of an atom. How far away are the electrons? Are they as far away as Mercury or Earth or Pluto? Well, the answer is they're 13 times further away than Pluto is. And electrons essentially have no size. If you stand on Pluto and you look at the sun's like that big. You go 13 times farther away and the sun is a prick. It's a pinpoint. It's an infinitesimally almost small dot in the heavens. It's not much different than the stars that are much, much further away. But if that's true, if you had like a molecule, you have two atoms and two nuclei. If the nuclei were as big as my hands, I'd have to rip my arms off and someone would have to take one of my arms and put it in a car and drive it across town. And that's where my other hand is. And here's this hand. And in between, there's nothing. You are 99.9999999 something percent emptiness. There's nothing here. This is empty space. Why does it feel like anything? Why is there physical substance to this? Well, because there are electrons amongst all the nuclei, and there's an electronic force field here. The reason that these atoms can't pass through these atoms is the electronic force field on these atoms hits the electronic force field on these atoms and prevents the atoms from passing through each other. But the atoms are so incredibly far apart. There's plenty of space. If you take away the electrons, my hand would go right through this thing, like it didn't even exist. The atoms would never even touch each other. So we literally are empty. How on earth, or why on earth, did the God of creation make a universe for us to live in and send his son to come and die literally for dust? That is an amazing prospect. If you took all the elements in the human body and distilled out the water, or even saved the water, and separated us into atoms, we'd be worth a few dollars on the market. You sell the iron, the phosphorus, the magnesium, the water if you want. We're worth a few dollars industrially, and we're empty on the inside. And yet our God came and took on this fleshly form and walked on this earth amongst us stinky humans and our stupid humans and our sinful humans, and he's walking on this earth, and then he dies so that I don't have to spend eternity in hell? What? Oh, science is cool. Science hits on the gospel. Genesis 3:19, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Sorry, I'm smiling. Once we consider what our position is and what we're made of, it only amplifies God. And it makes me smile because I realize what an incredible, amazing creator we have. By the way, I forgot to ask people earlier, but you guys who volunteered earlier, can you do me a favor? If you're a guest here and weren't here this morning, we have an email newsletter. Thank you, sir. We have an email newsletter. It comes out every Friday. If you'd like to sign up for our email newsletter, we're going to hand out a sign-up form. And they're in the back here in the auditorium on this chair. And if you would like, just put down your email address, your name, and your zip code, and we'll get you plugged into our information. Okay. Now that those are going around, let me ask you a question. What's evolution? What is it? Can you define what it means? You know what it is, but can you define it? Have you ever heard that evolutions just change over time? If you read just about any college textbooks, evolution has changed over time. It's the most common definition you'll ever hear. It is wrong. It is lame. That's not true, because I believe things change over time, and I don't believe in evolution. In fact, I wrote an entire article series on creation.com. A species were designed to change. Our God, in his creative brilliance, designed his species to adapt and modify and change over time. And if he didn't, most species would be extinct, because we know the environment changes. So change over time is not a good definition of evolution. In fact, it's a theoretical process, evolution, that leads to the common ancestry of all things. In other words, enough change over enough time in the right direction can possibly be an explanation of why we have so many species on Earth. Yet, it doesn't really work, because you can't get it off the ground. You can't get the origin of life. You can't get the origin of complexity. Sexual reproduction. Are you kidding me? Why on earth would any species go through sexual reproduction? And how does a butterfly figure out how to go through metamorphosis when all the internal organs liquefy? There aren't even cells in there. Just liquefy, blah, 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 and then it makes a butterfly, and the butterfly is the thing that lays the eggs. And if you can't get to the butterfly stage, you're dead. How on earth did that ever evolve? Those are great questions. But evolution, here's where the philosophy comes in. You have to add a philosophy to the study of biology, no matter what you do. Biology is just a study of life. Now, there's a philosophy there too, but if you take the study of life, biology, and add the philosophy of naturalism, that's a belief that nature's all there is. It's a belief that natural processes can explain everything. It's a philosophy that excludes God from day one. Because under naturalism, you can't have an outside force interfering with what's happening. You can't have miracles. You can't have a God who's manipulating things. Naturalism plus biology equals evolution. Now, I'm a theist. I'm not a naturalist. I believe in God. So depending on what form of theism you bring to the table, if you take biology and add theism to it, you're going to get some form of creation. Now, evolutionary creation, day-age creation, punctuated, whatever. If you want to pigeonhole me, you would call me a young earth creationist. So I believe the earth is thousands, not millions of years old, and I get that number from Scripture. Once you reject naturalism, all things are possible. God could have created over a gazillion years if he wished. He could have snapped his fingers and the universe could have come into existence if he wished. God can do anything he wants, right? But if God gave us a record of how, and not how, but of when he did it and the order of events that he did it in, well, that's the record. He did it that way. Okay, I'm fine with that. This is why I don't struggle with how old the universe is. It doesn't matter once you reject naturalism. I imagine, not that Adam was alive yet, but I imagine on the fourth day of creation, if Adam was standing on the surface of the earth as God's making the heavens, making the stars, he would see fireworks. Galaxies going zoom, zoom, pop, 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 as God's making things. I don't know if that's true. That's just how I imagine it. Because I don't need gravity and time or a Big Bang or anything like that to explain the universe. It was manufactured. Once it's manufactured, God lets go, and now everything starts working naturalistically. The universe does behave naturalistically. It really does. If I go like this and drop this, and I do it again, and I do it again, and I do it again, it's always good. I'm never expecting to do anything other than that because of the law of gravity. It's natural. By the way, that word is a problematic word. Nature is a Roman goddess. But in English, we don't have any other way to say things happen all by themselves according to the laws of probability and statistics. We just say it's natural, and it's very unfortunate. but that's our English word to describe that. You okay so far? Is this fun or not fun? Consider, not the television, we're going to zoom in here. That is a nucleotide, one of the bases in DNA. Oh, there's a DNA right there. Let's make a protein out of that DNA, shall we? What's involved? Well, let's super oversimplify everything, because if we tried to talk about the complexity, we'd never get anywhere. That thing is a polymerase. It's a very complex machine. It zips along the DNA. It sucks in from one end nucleotides. It opens up the DNA. By the way, there's about a dozen other proteins involved. We're only showing one. It lines up the nucleotides to one strand only of the DNA. So DNA has A, C, G, and T. Well, it's lining up A, C, G. Instead of T, there's a U, a uracil. And now in red, we have an RNA molecule. We're going to take that RNA molecule, let's make it into a protein. We're going to use these things called transfer RNAs. On the bottom, there's a 3-letter code that matches up the 3 letters in the DNA. And we're going to use a machine called a ribosome. It's a complex machine made of proteins and RNAs. It takes the transfer RNAs in, it lines them up one at a time. If it makes a mistake, it can back up and fix it. Ooh. And the top of the transfer RNA in red are amino acids. And they are joined together to make a chain. We call that a protein. But most proteins, if left to themselves, will fall into a bird's nest of completely uselessness. They need help folding. So other proteins, which are also folded in this process, called chaperones, grab onto that unfolded protein. They don't let it fold. And they bring it to another very complex machine called a chaperonin, which is shaped kind of like a watermelon. One end opens up. The unfolded protein is passed into it. It closes up and it folds the protein. If the protein doesn't fold correctly, it'll chop it up and recycle the pieces. We don't know how this thing works yet. We just know this is kind of what it does. Every step I'm showing you are PhD dissertations, Nobel Prizes, and millions of dollars of research that went into figuring these things out. Oh, and there we have a protein. A 3-dimensional shaped object. Actually, it's a 4-dimensional object, because proteins change shape over time. That's how they work. They bend and they do work. So a 4-dimensional object of 20 letters that we got from a 1-dimensional. Remember in math class what 1 dimension is? It's a line, right? You can model DNA as a line, as 1 dimension. There's 4 letters. Went from a 4-dimensional, 4-letter, 1-dimensional code to a 20-letter, 4-dimensional code. And there's no relationship between the function of the protein and the chemistry of the letters of A, C, G, and T. There's no feedback. It's not like the body says, oh, hey, I made this protein. Is that what I wanted? Oh, no, I think that should be an A. And it backs up. Okay, I can't change this. Okay, try again. There's none of that. It makes the protein, and the protein works or not, and you live or die. This is crazy. In our Evolution's Achilles' Heels documentary, we captured Dr. John Sanford. He's the man who invented the gene gun. You know, you've heard of genetically modified organisms, GMOs. Yeah, he invented that technology to make GMO plants. As a Christian, he was trying to feed the world. Okay, that right there is controversial. Step down off the controversy route, push it aside. Here's what he said in our video. He said something like, I will give the evolutionists millions of years. I'll give them proteins, I'll give them DNA, I'll give them RNA, I'll give them ATP, I'll give them all the machines that they need for the cell. I'll even give them a cell with all the parts inside. You still don't have life because you don't have a code. It's like I can manufacture computers from parts. You give me parts, I can slap computers together all day long. I will never have a functioning computer. Ever. Because I need Microsoft Windows or Apple whatever, OS whatever it's on right now, before this thing will work. And you know what? Even though we get frustrated with computer operating systems, they're incredibly annoying. They break and fall apart all the time. Especially back in the day. Remember Windows 3.1 trying to do computer networking? Oh, I hated that. And I had to wire my entire lab. It took months. It was so incredibly annoying. But that's the best humans could do after millions of man hours and woman hours of research. We're all beta testers of these things. You know that, right? We send error reports back. So trillions of hours of research went into these operating systems that can barely work, and they're powering something called a computer, which is nothing compared to the technology inside the cell. So the cellular operating system is orders of magnitude more complicated than the most complicated thing that humans ever could make. Such things don't come out of random processes. You don't string random letters together and ever get information. That's one of the Achilles heels of evolution. So where does the information come from? Consider Psalm 92:4. For you, O Lord, have made me glad by your work. At the work of your hands I sing for joy. There's been a couple of times in my scientific career where I worked really hard for months, and I finally have a graph on a computer screen. I'm like, wow, look at that. And I suddenly realized no one had ever seen that before. God revealed it to me, and therefore I get to show it to the world. That's not something that breeds arrogance. It's something that breeds humility. That's actually a terrifying prospect. And yet, on the other hand, where, as Johann Kepler said, thinking God's thoughts after him. Science should be magisterial. We should be using science to praise the Creator. But instead, most scientists use science to denigrate, deny, obfuscate, or lie about the Creator. I showed it earlier that modern science is standing on the shoulders of Christians. Almost every branch of modern science, except maybe evolutionary biology, but almost every branch of modern science was founded by someone who believed the Bible. You cannot separate that from the historical facts. Science and the Bible are not at war with one another. But what happened? Why is it that most scientists today don't have any belief in God at all? Well, the philosophers got involved. Something called the Enlightenment. Enlightenment. They invented the phrase the Dark Ages. Basically, everything before us was dark. We are enlightened. Woo-hoo, are you arrogant or what? This is where humanism comes in. Naturalism, etc. And these people took human thought and ran it off to the left. And they stole the thought that there's scientific law. And they got rid of the scientific lawgiver. They took the fact that the universe behaves naturalistically because our God created it to operate mechanically and predictably. Because our God is predictable, therefore so is the universe. Oh, the universe is predictable. Okay. And they just said that's basic law of the universe. It's predictable. But there's no reason for it to be predictable. They just assumed it was. You ever hear the multiverse? Right? There's possibly multiple different universes out there, each one with the different laws of physics. Okay, well, if that's true, how do we know that the laws of physics are always the same in any universe? How do we know they don't change? If they get a difference from one place to another, how do we know the laws of physics are the same on Earth as they are out in the heavens? How do I know how much time has gone by when I take a telescope and look at the stars? How do I know light speed really is the same everywhere? All of a sudden, you can't know anything. Without a God who is upholding the universe in a consistent and constant manner, you can't know the universe is consistent and constant. You just know that in your own personal experience, and you are a blip in this compared to the size of the universe and the evolutionist model, the age of the universe. But even the biblical age of the universe of thousands of years, you're still just a blip. What do you know? What have you experienced? The whole flat earth thing that came up a couple years ago. I studied this intently. I wrote long articles on flat earthers and where they're coming from. And what I figured out was that they don't trust other people. And yet a single human is too small to discover the size and shape of the earth. You have to trust other people to do experiments, or you have to do an experiment here and go someplace far away and do another experiment, but no one's willing to do that. And therefore, this great distrust of other people's information says, I'm only going to believe what I can see. Man, that's arrogant. I'm sorry. We have to trust other people. When you get on the highway and drive your car, you are trusting other people. So it is true, the universe was created. It is true, the universe is naturalistic. But it is also true that naturalism is terrible at explaining origins. Because without the lawgiver, why do we have law? And without a creator, how do we get information? And it's things like that. This lawgiver, the very power of God is infusing the universe and upholding the universe. The universe came from the mind of God. An uncountable number of stars and galaxies, and the James Webb Space Telescope just shows us galaxies all the way down. It's crazy. Look at Hebrews 11:3. By faith, we understand the universe is created by the Word of God. So that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Interesting. Is he talking about naturalism there? What we see was not made by natural processes? I'm not sure, but notice the faith. Faith is not an empty gesture. Faith is based on reason. Consider that all the times when God in the Old Testament was telling the Israelites to have faith in Him, He always reminded them of what He had done before. I'm the one who took you out of Egypt. I'm the one who parted the Red Sea. I'm the one who fed you in the wilderness. I'm the one who protected you from all these other peoples. He's always thinking, look, I am the man, therefore trust me. We have faith, reasonably, to understand the universe is created by the Word of God. That's a basic Christian proposition. I think it's really cool. You okay so far? Okay, everyone do this. Go. All right, we're not done. What is science? I asked you that this morning. Here's another possible way of thinking of science. Imagine that reality is these red bars. And imagine that science is the gray bars. And science is just a way of thinking. Can you see that even if your thinking is wonky, you might get some things right? That's evolution. In the end, it is actually wrong. But it does get some things right. It gets some things extraordinarily right. It absolutely nails it. Here's our model. That's a prediction. Oh, that's true in science. Therefore, evolution is true. There's a great way of arguing, and I see this in science all the time. You open up some science textbook, and they'll say, here's a true fact, here's a true fact, here's a true fact, and here's a true fact. All those things line up with evolution, therefore evolution is true. Is that a good way of thinking? No, because you have to address what you can't answer. What can evolution not explain? That's where you find out whether evolution is true or not. And by skipping over all that, they paint this picture of it working all the time, when it doesn't. Now, I'm not saying on the left here that I have a perfect understanding of the way the universe works. I would never do that. But can you see that the more you align your way of thinking to reality, the more you'll understand, the better you'll be, the more clear the universe will be? I think so. I think science took a sharp, as I said earlier, left-hand turn during the Enlightenment. And we actually held back scientific progress because we diverged from the God of science. And I kind of wonder in heaven, will there be science in heaven? Will we be able to invent stuff? Can we make rockets and go surfing on Saturn and come back by Sabbath? I don't know, it just sounds cool. Sorry, making that up. Hey, another question then. What is natural selection? Is the absolute center point of Darwinian evolution. What is it? Well, it's not magic. Again, nature's not alive. Nature's not thinking. Nature's not doing anything. But it's not a good phrase, because what's being selected? It's really another phrase, survival of the fittest. You've heard that. Herbert Spencer, one of Darwin's cousins, I think, invented that phrase. That's not a good phrase either, because who's the fittest? The fittest survive. Who's the fittest? The fastest, the strongest, the best looking, the one with the smartest, the best reflexes, the one who blends in with the environment. What is fitness? What's the definition of that? Actually, it's, by definition, the organism who has the most number of offspring. Essentially, he or she who dies with the most children wins. But that's obvious. If there's a war and one group of people kills off another group of people, guess who got naturally selected? Guess who has all the babies? But it also works backwards. Consider that the Germans in World War II, the SS, right, the super soldiers, that's not what SS stands for, but the German elite, the cream of the crop of all the German fighting units, had the highest fatality ratio of any units in World War II. Why? Because they were stupid. They're like, oh, let's go, and they just charge, and they get obliterated. So who got all the girls after the war? Not the biggest and the strongest and the smartest. They're all dead. It's all about reproduction. It should be called differential reproduction. Some organisms have more offspring than others based on how well they fit the environment. That's not a contentious issue. Let me give you an example. Here's two bacteria. One is a mutant, one's normal. The mutant has a defective pore, and those purple antibiotics can't quite get in. And food can't quite get in either, the green thing, so they grow slowly. But on the left, normal pore, food goes right in, bacteria grows, but the antibiotic gets in. Oh. Wait a second. In this example of antibiotic resistance, and honestly, most examples of antibiotic resistance, the antibiotic resistant bacteria grows more slowly. Usually it has a defective system that doesn't let the antibiotic in. Or it amplifies a bunch of genes for detoxifying the antibiotic. Therefore, it's spending all this time making these genes, all these proteins that it normally wouldn't do. So it grows slowly. So in natural selection, the mutant that's not as fit as the original is the one that survives. That's not the way Darwin thought about it, but that's what we see in medicine all the time. Let me introduce you to another topic. I call this a two worlds fallacy. I hinted at this earlier. Imagine we have the world of evolution and the world of creation. And in the world of evolution, we have all these things that supports evolution. And so you can list all these things and tell the student, therefore evolution is true. Does that work? Why does it not work? Well, one reason is we have two theories that are trying to explain the same data. Anything that both theories claim cannot be evidence of one theory over the other. Natural selection perfectly fits in with the biblical model. It's not proof of evolution. I call this non-discriminating information, or information you can't use in an argument. And almost all evolution creation debates, people focus on the stuff that both people agree with. And almost always the evolutionist wants to steer the conversation away from what they can't explain, like the origin of life. They don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And you'll see it if you ever engage with someone on it. Oh, well, that's not evolution, that's the origin of life. What are you talking about? Where's life come from, buddy? Because if you don't have a model for origin of life, who made life? Remember this, 1950s, the famous experiment where they took inorganic gases, ammonia, methane, water, hydrogen. They put it in boiling water and they circulated it through a spark chamber. And they just let it circulate and circulate and circulate and circulate for a long time. And after a while, they noticed there's some brown stuff on the bottom of the thing that was accumulating. And they said, oh, this is exactly what we thought. Random chemical reactions are making amino acids. They found the building blocks of life. You remember these claims? The building blocks of life. Therefore, evolution is possible because biological molecules can come from non-biological molecules. Case closed. Evolution must be true. Yeah, there's problems with this. One of them is that really what they got was tar. Random molecules. Random chemical reactions produce random molecules. They did get a few amino acids, some of the real simple ones. Yep. But there's other amino acids they did not get and they cannot get in this. Some amino acids are really complicated chemicals. It takes living things to make them. And biochemists have a hard time making them in test tubes under extremely carefully controlled conditions. But the origin of life fails. Not only can't you get complex organic molecules, you can't get polymers. A polymer is a long molecule. You are made of polymers. You have 6 feet of DNA inside every one of your cells. Your chromosome 1 is a foot long, and you have 2 of them in each cell. Each cell you can't even see. So we know that God's an amazing packaging engineer. You have long proteins. You have long, what are called polysaccharides or chains of sugars. You have very long molecules in your body. The long molecules are what keeps your skin from leaking. I mean, you're made of long molecules. They don't form in water. If you took spaghetti, if you take spaghetti and put it in a dish of water and leave it on your counter for weeks, it will turn into sugar. If you take sugar and put it in water, it will never turn into spaghetti. Because the chemical reaction is driving those long things apart. Water gets in there and breaks the bonds of polysaccharides, sugars, of proteins to make amino acids, and DNA and RNA to make nucleotides. The chemical reaction drives apart the biopolymers, and yet we're made of biopolymers. Where do they come from? From some warm little pond? They can't exist. Plus, even if you did form them, like if you put sugar in water and let it sit there for a long time, and you took all the sugar out and ran through a machine to count of how many chains of sugars you get, you'll get some of them where you have two sugars joined together naturally. Mm-hmm. And a vanishingly few number, you'll have 3 in a row. Maybe 1 out of a trillion, you have 4 in a row. You probably never find 5 sugars lined up. And you're made of very long sugar molecules. So they break down. Plus, they almost all these biochemical reactions, like if you're trying to make like DNA, ACGCTTAA, CCGTTTAAAA, well, guess what? It reacts with sugars. It reacts with other DNAs. It reacts with RNAs. It reacts with all sorts of inorganic molecules. You get side chains. You can't have side chains. You need long strings of molecules. They don't come from random chemistry. And as I said earlier, you can't get the instructions. So honestly, evolution can't even get started. We wrote about this in our Evolution's Achilles Heels, the book, and then we presented it in our movie also. Whole chapter in there on the origin of life. They're back there, by the way. I highly recommend these. Okay, 1 or 2 more illustrations, then we'll stop. Because our brains get full, don't they? I want you to consider what you can directly observe. What's the smallest thing that you can see with your eye? Maybe a speck of dust floating in a sunbeam. What's the largest thing that you can see that you know how big it is? You don't know how big the sun is. The sun could be small and close or really big and far away. It would appear the same size. Just like the moon is 80 times closer than the sun, and I don't know how it works. It's 8 million times closer, whatever it is. The moon and the sun are the same size, but the moon's a lot smaller than the sun. It's just a lot closer. So you don't know how large those things are. You can figure it out using very simple 8th grade math, 9th grade math. You can do it, but it's hard. Okay? I would say that the largest thing that you can experience is probably your house, and you know how big it is because you've been all over that house. Maybe your yard, not your neighborhood, because you haven't been in everyone's house. You haven't paced every inch of that neighborhood many, 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 many times. Okay, so that's your zone of direct observation for size. What's the shortest time period you can experience? Blink of an eye? That's about it. Maybe something a little faster. But even your, the old movies, they flash at 30 frames a second. You couldn't tell that it was flashing. So you can't experience things faster than 30 frames a second or 30 hertz. What's the longest thing in time that you can experience? Well, it's only things that have happened during your lifetime. So maybe when you were born, Dad planted an apple tree in your front yard, and that tree's been growing your entire life. And so when you're 2, 3, 4 years old, you realize, hey, this is a tree that Dad planted. And so you start watching when it's this big, and now it's this giant tree. And then you die, and you can't pass that memory on to your children. You have a very limited window of what you can actually experience. And humans want to say that we figured out where the universe came from? Now, we have invented microscopes and telescopes and atomic clocks, so we've been able to expand our zone of direct observation into the zone of instrumentation, extending our senses to things that limit us, okay? But outside of that, the largest, the shortest, the smallest and the longest time periods, we can only make deductions. Maybe informed guesses, maybe not, but this is where the creation-evolution debate lies. We're not arguing over the vibration frequency of a cesium atom. We're arguing over where the cesium atom came from. And notice that on the x-axis, there's a line there on the left side, on the right side, the end of the historic period. If all humans pool all their knowledge and write it down in books, we can extend our zone of observation historically back a few thousand years. And that's it. Early human history has no records across most of the planet. And the earliest human history that has records, I think these are people that lived right after Noah's flood. And we have a Bible where we have a record that goes back about 6,000 years to when God created everything. Well, there can't be anything before that because there was nothing to make a record of. But besides that, the records just stop as if there was nothing before that time frame. Isaiah 46:10. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. Love this. How does God make known the end from the beginning? How does God know what's going to happen in the future? How does God keep all of time in his mind at the same time? Well, you've heard time being described as an arrow, right? The arrow of time. Well, this arrow is thousands of years long now. How do you see the arrow? Because if you're standing close to it, you have to look left and right to see the beginning and the end. So maybe God backs way, way up. He backs way, way up, and the arrow gets smaller and smaller in his vision. You still got to kind of look left and right. But what if God, being a multidimensional being, I was kind of hoping that there was a pencil or a pen up here, but there's not. It's okay. What if God could take the arrow of time and twist it in 3 dimensions? Just like I can take this and turn it in 3 dimensions. What if he could take the 4th dimension, time, and turn it and look at it from one end? And all of a sudden, time collapses to a point. The reason that time doesn't matter to God is because all things are simultaneous to God. He's not in time. God doesn't have a future. God is in the future. Demons have a future. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to torment us before our time? Said the demons in the man of Gadarene. They were afraid of the future. Everything God has created is stuck in his arrow of time. We can't go backwards, we can go forwards, and Einstein said we can change the rate of the progress of time, but it's inexorably only going in one direction. And the angels are trapped in that, and the demons are trapped in it, and they tremble at their future. But God is not trapped in it. God is not slow. The reason why a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years is like a day to God, by the way, that's referring to why doesn't God come back and kill all the bad people? Because God is more patient than we are. The passage of time is irrelevant to him. See, our God is at a higher level than any other man-made religious God. And that's really neat. Consider the world's smallest motor. You have millions upon millions of these in your cells. It's the ATP synthase motor. It's making a thing called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy currency of the cell. It's a molecule that stores lots of energy. And it takes these things called protons, like the opposite of an electron is a proton, and uses it to spin a rotor. And it takes this crazy molecule called adenosine diphosphate, which is highly reactive, which you cannot find in nature. Phosphate is hard to find in nature because phosphate will react with any metal and form an insoluble salt. And yet you use phosphate as your energy storage. Where does life get the phosphate from? In fact, you make so much of this, you pretty much make your own weight of ATP every day and burn it almost instantly. This is a crazy system. In fact, these proteins are coded in DNA. Remember the DNA, the protein movie I showed you earlier? Well, the information from these proteins is in DNA, and it takes a fantastic amount of ATP to produce a protein. So what came first? The proteins, the ATP synthase motor, the ATP, or the code in the DNA that makes all these things? There's like a 3 or 4 way chicken and egg problem here. These sorts of systems that are so interleaved, they're intertwined in their complexity. They can't arrive spontaneously. It's like when God made life, he took living things, he fashioned the membrane, he added all the components to it, he wound up everything, added a little bit of energy, put the information in there, and then let go. And that's why we're alive, and that's why living things exist. It took the creative brilliance of an outside power that we can't even comprehend. An outside power where all of time collapses to a single point. What? I can't understand God. But that's good. I don't want to be able to understand God. I don't want him to be a human-like form standing on a mountaintop with lightning bolts in his hand. That's a petty God. I don't want that God. I want a God that is unfathomable and so far above the universe that we can only fall on our faces in his presence. People say, yeah, what are you going to do with it when you get to heaven? I said, I don't know. After the first 1,000,000 years, I might look up. Psalm 139:14, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. Jeremiah 10:12, it is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens. It kills me that people don't know this. It hurts to think that people are rejecting this God. And consider Charles Darwin himself. Have you ever heard that Charles Darwin repented on his deathbed and became a Christian? That's an urban myth. It's not true. Just saying. This is from his autobiography. Thus, disbelief crept over me at a very slow rate, but was last complete. The rate was so slow I felt no distress, and have never since doubted, even for a second, that my conclusion was correct. I can indeed hardly see how anyone ought to wish Christianity to be true. For if so, the plain language of the text seems to show that the men who do not believe, and this includes my father, brother, and almost all of my friends, will be everlastingly punished. Now, pardon my French here, and this is damnable doctrine. Whoa. First of all, he just admitted that he's surrounded by atheists. This is the intellectual society of Elizabethan England, not Elizabethan, of Victorian England. Atheists all over the place. And I'm sorry about that word at the end there, but Mr. Darwin, how dare you use that word? First of all, my Christianity is the force that gave you the ability to even have a free thought in your head. Any other society before that, they would have killed you for thinking different. Second of all, you have no definition of that word. An evolutionist cannot make any moral claim. And yet they do it all the time. And they don't like you Christians because they're threatened by you Christians because you have an alternate worldview that conflicts with their worldview. And honestly, they don't want the God of rules. Continuing, Charles Darwin, a man who has no assured and ever-present belief in the existence of a personal God or future existence with retribution and reward, that's heaven and hell, can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow his impulses and instincts which are the strongest or which seem to him the best ones. That's called hedonism. Welcome to America, my friends. Oh, there's so much more. I'm actually skipping over a lot here at the end. I want to leave you with this one. It's not enough to just knock down evolution. We want to know the God who created. It's not enough just saying these other people are wrong. That would just leave us empty. Consider John chapter 1, verses 1, 2, and 3. Anyone who has studied Koine Greek, that's the Greek of the New Testament, has studied this passage. And archein he logos, kai ha logos on prostan theon, kai theas on halagos. Sorry about my pronunciation. It's been an hour of talking. I can't pronounce anything anymore. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. But not two words. The Word was God. Oh. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. And without him was not anything made that was made. That's an important thing, by the way. God was not made. all things have a cause, right? That's a law in science. Everything must have a cause. No, the things that are caused must have a cause. God is not caused. There's no time where God didn't exist. He does not have to be made. So, without him was not anything made that was made. The universe was made. God was not. And a little down later in John, chapter 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That Word becoming flesh, that's called the incarnation. That carnation is flesh, carne. The incarnation of God indwelling a human body. We call him Jesus Christ. But wait a minute, if the Word became flesh, and the Word was God, and the Word always existed, and all things were made through him, and without him was not anything, Jesus Christ is the creator of the universe. He's not just a man. He's God who, for some strange reason, decided to come down here and save me. And hopefully save you. And if you don't know that Jesus, there are people here who will sit down with you and have a nice, long, heart-to-heart conversation. With all I just said about creation and our place and how we're made of dust and all that kind of stuff, we need to make accounting of the God of creation, or we're in desperate, dark trouble. So if you haven't yet, maybe it's time. Find a Christian and start talking to them about that God. I'm leaving after tonight. I'm driving home tomorrow, flying home tomorrow, and all the books on the tables back here have to be UPS'd home. And I don't want to pay for UPS. Now, this morning, you people turned out, and thank you so much. Actually, there was less books here than I anticipated based on the size of the audience. But I sure would like to have a smaller UPS bill because their rates have doubled over the last couple of years. So the things are there for you. Please browse the tables and take home what you wish. Oh, good. Look at that, the time. We were talking earlier if we want to do a Q&A. Can we do a question and answer time? Would you be okay with that? What if I promised it would be 15 minutes long only? Would you be okay with that? All right. Before we get there, though, please consider Creation Magazine. As we're doing the Q&A, we're going to be circulating a sign-up form, Creation Magazine. Second opportunity now, if you didn't get it earlier, or if you're a guest. I know what we talked about tonight was really complicated. Most of what CMI does is not that complicated. I promise. So Creation Magazine is there for you. We have the digital version, which you get with a 2-year subscription. Sign-up form is really easy. We just got to put down your contact details. And for a 2-year subscription, we're going to throw in 2 DVDs. One's called Fallout, which is our interviews with college students. Another one is called Darwin, the Voyage That Shook the World. It's an hour-long documentary on the life of Charles Darwin. You can't understand this creation-evolution debate if you don't understand Charles Darwin. Here's Evolution's Achilles' Heels, back on the tables. Biblical Geology 101. I know I still have some of those out there. Please take avail of that. Or the Deep Time Deception. There's a lot more to do with what I talked about tonight. There's one more on the table I saw. We also produce a lot of video content. In fact, all of our modern videos, we do streaming. If you just go to creation.com and click on store, you very easily find our video section. In fact, the first one that we ever did was called The Historical Atom, Theological Conundrums and Scientific Implications. Where I'm basically saying that, that Y chromosome atom that the geneticists discovered actually is the atom of the Bible. And that's free on our video service. We also have the high-tech sale and a couple other DVDs out there. And of course, there is our website. Now, as we break into some questions, I'm going to be trying to model this, and it's hard because my Irish temper flares up when people insult me. Not that you're going to, but when I'm interacting with people, man, I have to really check my temper. And I'm reminded to do that from 1 Peter 3:15. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that's in you, and yet do it with gentleness and respect. And yes, there was a time when Jesus made a whip of cords and went to the temple and hit people with it and overturned tables. There are times for aggressive action. Paul says some rather rude things about some other people in his time. Okay, but for someone who's asking questions of you, we're supposed to be ready to give an answer and to do it respectfully. You okay? Everyone good? Your brains hurt? All right. It is 9:01. It's 7:01 your time. Who's got a clock? Sir, you wearing a watch? 7:15, you're going to go like that, and we're going to stop, I promise, okay? Because I know Monday's coming up, and everyone's really busy. All right? Okay, we don't need a microphone. In fact, I don't like handing out a microphone, because sometimes when you give someone a microphone, man, they could say crazy things. Here's the rules. Please, no doctrinal questions. I think, honestly, that I agree with pretty much everything that might be preached in this church. I kind of got my antennas up all day today. But I don't necessarily know that. So if you ask me a question about, plus I don't want to divide the audience necessarily, so modes of baptism, free will versus predestination, King James, not King James, the role of women in the, no. You ask me a question like that, I'm saying, great, you have to come back next Sunday, because now we have a sermon topic. Anything about science is fair game. I'm going to try to answer it briefly. I'm trying to point you to a resource that might answer it more fully. Please don't ask me a question about COVID-19. Because no matter how I answer, I will make someone mad. And CMI's position is contrary to a lot of the positions that a lot of Christians have adopted. We've tried to do a very scientific position, and it makes people angry. If you want to ask about COVID-19, go to creation.com, type in COVID-19, and man, you're going to get some very long articles explaining all the details, okay? We can do this? Oh, by the way, questions end in question marks. All right, who's first? Who's the brave soul? Sir?
Dinosaurs, do you think they're all pre-flood, or is there dinosaurs after flood?
Great question. Do I think all dinosaurs are pre-flood, or were there dinosaurs after the flood? I wrote an article for creation.com. You can look it up. Dinosaurs are almost certainly extinct. My boss made me put in the phrase almost certainly. There are reports going back into the 70s and earlier of people reporting on things that seem like dinosaurs still alive. In the Congo Basin, there's a beast called Mokele Mbembe. Supposedly pterosaurs flying around some of the Solomon Islands and the South Pacific Islands. And those reports needed to be made. But 30, 40 years on, none of them have been confirmed. I'm already held to a double standard. I can't afford to present in public information I can't validate. So I recommended to people, just take that idea, wrap it up in a box, put a bow on it, and a thing that says open in 10 years, and put it on the back shelf of your brain. I'm not going to talk about it in public. I have no information to suggest that dinosaurs are still alive. And you know what? Let's say we did find one alive. What would the evolutionists say? Evolution isn't true. No. They say, what do you know? One of them survived all these years. And I know that because when they discovered the coelacanth off Madagascar, that fish, the Ripidician fish with the stumpy legs that they thought was a transitional form between fish and land animals, I'm thinking way predates the dinosaurs. And there it is, still alive. It didn't mean evolution was true. It just means one of them survived. In fact, now they have different populations of them discovered. So, creation.com. You also might want to look at our big fat dinosaur book. It's almost brand new. Comprehensive, I think it's called Discovering Dinosaurs. My brain can't think of it at the moment. It's on the tables in the back. It's a nice cover, hardcover book. And it's full of information. Cool question. Anybody else? Sir.
Which do you find more difficult? Convincing a non-Christian or a Christian to believe in the God of creation that the Bible describes as you've alluded to?
What do I find more difficult? Convincing a non-Christian or a Christian of the God of creation, of these Genesis ideas that, creation only thousands, not millions of years ago. I don't know which one is more difficult. Sometimes hitting up a non-believer with these things that they've never even thought of, coming way out of left. Where is this guy coming from? It's shocking enough to, when I have a conversation, but not usually. And honestly, I can't convince anyone of anything. I'm not a very good arguer, but plus, this is a Holy Spirit thing. You're not going to believe in creation without God working on your heart. Now, I know several people who believed in creation before they became Christians. I know literally probably 5 or 10. But God was working on them. And evolution was preventing them from accepting the truth claims of the Bible. And when evolution fell apart, oh, look at that, I guess the Bible's true. Christians are sometimes a tough nut to crack. I've had very aggressive pushback from certain Christians, even at churches, because they learn from grandpa the gap theory or something like that, and it's just they've always rested on it. Cool question, but sorry, I can't answer it. I don't know what's harder.
I've heard an objection from atheists when they find that when you talk about the complexities of how things work. Like a lot of them, like all these enzymes and replicated DNA, crazy amount, all the complexities of the universe. He said, well, if we have infinite time, then that there's infinite possibilities. But yeah, if I'm given infinite time, then any things can pop up. It is possible. What's your response?
Okay, did everyone hear that? One objection we hear from the evolutionary community is, yeah, you creationists talk about this complexity and how hard everything and how improbable things are, but if you have infinite amount of time, then anything can happen. That's not actually true. Because you need incredibly unpredictable things to happen simultaneously. So yeah, you might get this enzyme spontaneously forming, but it does no good unless it's integrated into a system. The whole system has to appear spontaneously. Now you're talking about miracles. And evolutionists don't have infinite time. They have 13.8 billion years to the Big Bang. They have 12 billion years to the formation of the Earth. They've got 5 billion years till the Earth is cool enough to sustain biological molecules. That's not a lot of time. They don't have infinite time. They don't have infinite trials. You know the old adage, give a bunch of monkeys some typewriters and eventually at random they'll type out the works of William Shakespeare? You've heard that, right? Great. Now go find the works of William Shakespeare. You'll spend an infinite amount of time reading each one before you finally find it. Where is it? Your universe will be up to here in paper. The whole universe. So it's not enough just to make it, for it to form. You also have to integrate it into a system. So random things happening, first of all, they don't have infinite time, but the probability is such that you can show improbability. So improbability, you can never say something's impossible. But you can say the probability of this happening within the last 5 billion years is 1 in 10 to the negative 1,000, which is an incredibly small number. And when you talk about all the things, if you just keep on adding up, okay, this has to happen, 1 out of a million. This has to happen, 1 out of a million. This has to happen, 1 out of a million. This has to happen, 1 out of a million. What's a million times a million times a million times a million? 1 divided by that number is the probability of just those things happening, and we're not even talking about all the other things that also has to happen. The idea that life came about spontaneously is antithetical to everything we know about the second law of thermodynamics, information processing, and all sorts of other different fields of science. I'm not the one who believes in the bigger miracle. And yet they can't go there. So yeah, I understand the objection is there. An article I wrote on for Creation Magazine, which is now on creation.com, Time the Great Enabler. Charles Darwin would not have come up with evolutionary theory if he didn't already have billions of years. And that came from the geologists, and they got that idea from the philosophers in the 1600s. So billions of years came before evolution. You needed the time to enable Darwin and others to come up with these ideas. Cool question. Everyone understand how I answered that? They don't have infinite time. And even if they have an improbable thing that did happen, fine. You have to have too many improbable things happening at the same time in the same place. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Something that I recently heard about with respect to the human fossil record was that they recently pushed back
Yeah. Morocco, Greece, outside, Israel, outside of Africa itself. Okay.
Can you speak to, obviously that those numbers cannot be true. I was wondering if you could speak to the dating methods that were used, how they got those numbers, and if there's actually like scientific problems with the methods used to get those numbers.
Okay. Dating methods is a difficult problem. The deep time deception will deal with that. Evolution's Achilles heels will deal with that. We have an entire chapter on radiometric dating. When we're talking about dating of archaeology, it's really difficult. One of the classic ones is the Laetoli footprints in Africa. So a family, 2 adults and a child, and the child stepped in one of the adults' footprints on newly laid down volcanic ash, which then turned to stone. But they dated this like 3 million years ago. Whoa, no, humans could not walk upright 3 million years ago. This is not possible. This must be Homo erectus. No, Homo erectus couldn't do that. The Homo habilis couldn't do it. What do we do? And so they redated it, and eventually they dated the ash layer based on the evolutionary history of peccaries, pig teeth. It has nothing to do with, they threw out the radiometric dates. They did not match the evolutionary timeline. So it's not straightforward. They can't just walk up and say, I know how old this is. They cannot do that. They have to put that into their system that they've built. And then they might add, carbon dating can go back to 50, 60, 70,000 theoretical years ago. And yet we find carbon-14 in dinosaur bones consistently. They can't be millions of years old if they have carbon-14 in them. They use something called thermoluminescence. They'll take a bone and put it in dark and warm it up, and the phosphate molecules release photons. And depending upon how old they are, older ones will release fewer photons than newer ones, so they can age date a bone. But we've never gone back in time to look at something that's like 300,000 years old to know how much phospholuminescence it should have. We don't know. In fact, one of the studies looking at DNA breakdown over time, very important to know that DNA breaks down very quickly. And so if we find evidence of DNA in dinosaur bones, either one, it's not really DNA, which it sure looks like it, or 2, DNA breaks down a lot slower than we think, but we can measure how fast it breaks down. They used extinct moa bones in New Zealand. They took the bones, they looked at the DNA, how long the pieces were, and they graphed age versus DNA decay, and they watch it go, or this, or whatever it was. They show an exponential breakdown in the DNA. But they use carbon dating to date the bones. It's circular. The carbon dating, especially when you get earlier, let's say it this way. The Earth's magnetic field protects us from cosmic rays coming into us from outer space. Cosmic rays, when they strike nitrogen atoms in the atmosphere, manufacture carbon-14, which has a very characteristic half-life, I think 5,280 years, something like that. So carbon-14 breaks down very quickly and is made in the atmosphere. It depends upon how strong the Earth's magnetic field is. Well, we've been measuring the Earth's magnetic field for over 100 years, and it's in an exponential decline mode. Every year is like 3% less than the year before. Or every 100 years is 3% less. There's some number there you can put on that, which means if you go back in time, the Earth's magnetic field gets stronger, which means less cosmic ray influx, which means ancient things would have had less carbon-14 in them. We measure them today. They have less carbon-14. We say, these things are really old. No, they're only a few thousand years old. They just had less carbon-14 in them. So all the radiometric dating techniques have issues, and they're not consistent necessarily. And generally, they might do several different radiometric dating techniques on a sample and throw away the ones they don't like and keep the one that fits their model. So how old are those bones they're finding outside of Africa? I have no idea. I mean, biblically I have an idea, but scientifically I can't actually date them. And what we see is often someone will work up a dating scheme, and then some next generation, they'll just throw it out entirely. Totally turn everything over. And all of a sudden, we have 8 bones that are 30 million years ago instead of 3 million years ago, or something like that. Things can change pretty radically. It's really kind of funny. Remember earlier I said half of what we think is true isn't? A lot of those kind of historical reconstructions will be thrown out by the next generation rethinking this. There's a big problem we have in genetics. When we look at the difference between humans and chimpanzees, even when I was in I was 916. When I was in graduate school, this is in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was taught that humans and chimpanzees have separated about 3 million years ago. After we completed the Human Genome Project and the Chimpanzee Genome Project, it was 6 million years ago. I hear 6.5 million, I hear 7, 8 million years ago all the time now. Some people are advocating for 15, 16 million years ago. But that can't be true, because if humans and chimpanzees split 15 or 16 million years ago, when you had gorillas and orangutans, you would have apes living with T-Rexes. You can't just arbitrarily push the time frame back. So genetics is fighting archaeology right now. So how old are those bones? Who are we talking to? What technique are they measuring, etc. Creation.com has answers to a lot of these. Our 8-man Q&A page, our radiometric dating Q&A page, my article, How Carbon Dating Works, great resources for you. Plus various books and things on the tables will also answer those questions. We good? You want to close or you want me to close? All right. Thank you very much. You're a great audience.
Amen. Praise God for the truth, right? Well, let's stand for our final closing prayer. Was there anything else, Jason? Can't see anything. Okay. I encourage you all to go visit and buy material back there, make a donation to Creation Ministries. What you've seen tonight, the Bible is the ultimate source of truth. And, there are people who get excited about evidences, and I'm one of them. I like that. I think that's awesome. But we don't verify the Bible by other things. The Bible establishes truth, and I appreciate that reality that you have promoted tonight, Dr. Carter. So let's have a word of prayer, and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for this opportunity to come together and think seriously about creation. You're the creator. We're the creatures. Lord, we worship you. We acknowledge our dependence on you. And I thank you for the record of truth, the Bible, that we have. So I ask your blessing on Dr. Carter as he travels back. I pray that you would bless him and the Creation Ministries International team. And thank you for each person that's here. And I pray if there is one here who does not know the truth, Lord, that you would work according to your perfect will to draw them, Lord, to yourself. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, thank you.